We're making our way through 2 Kings. We're up to chapter 8. And I will tell you that chapters 8 through 12 mark a transition. We're going to be moving from miracles to murder. There's no mention of Elisha in all those chapters, 9, 10, 11, 12. We've just covered miracles of Elisha. We've talked about how they can apply to us in our everyday lives. And then no mention of Elisha for these chapters. Chapter 13, he comes back, he has one prophetic message, and then he dies. There are going to be 117, I said named, I should say counted, murders, assassinations in Syria, Israel, and Judah, plus others. There's a transition from miracles to murder. In Syria, we're going to see where Hazael suffocates Ben-Hadad. In Israel, Jehu is going to come and he's going to kill Joram, Jezebel, Ahaziah of the Judah, and 112 family members. Count them all up. Then we're going to see an intrigue. Of all those assassinations, there'll be a 1-year-old baby that is saved and hidden by his aunt, and his very old uncle, Jehoiada. We won't get to Jehoiada today, but it'll be a very interesting study. A rose by any other name would still smell as sweet. I'm sure you've heard that before. That's Shakespeare. And I will say a John by any other word still smells the same. Now, that does not mean a prostitute's customer. That's a slang for a toilet. And I bring that up because the names that we're going to see are going to be, at best, confusing. I can't recall growing up that I've had to spell my first name, John. But now I find myself spelling my first name all the time because there are Jons that a generation ago were Jonathans. And so you didn't have to spell John because if it was Jon, they would say Jonathan. When I was growing up, the culture was that you got named after a saint, Catholic Church, right? And in the church I grew up, there were these monster murals of all the apostles on the ceiling of the church. So who do you think the leading names were? Those 12. There were a couple Daniels thrown in, a couple Stevens thrown in, a couple Michaels thrown in because it was St. Michael's Church, right? And so when you looked at family trees, you could see John here, John there, John everywhere. Everyone was spelled John. I don't remember ever meeting a Jonathan until I was an adult. We're going to see that same thing happening in these two family trees, the family tree of Judah and the family tree of Israel. But to make matters worse, take any one translation, and they're not always spelled the same. Then go across translations, and it gets even more tricky. All right? So, there's a difference between Bible study and Bible reading. And we're encouraging everybody to take part of the read through the Bible in a given year, and I would encourage you to do that. I would also encourage you, this is January and it's the beginning of resolutions, and so don't worry about that. It's not happened to be January 1st. Start a journal. And that's a little bit different than a diary. Write down your observations and the things that you may have learned in the day. And what you'll discover when you're coming through year 2, year 10, and year 12 is when you look back and you see these different observations and you can see how you've grown or maybe not grown. The last time we as a group went through 2 Kings was in 2012. So I was looking at my 2012 notes, and more often than not, when I look at my old notes, I look at that and I say, did I know that? Because I rediscover these things. And we each can rediscover things as we dig into God's word. And so I would encourage you, you know, resolutions are a point of controversy. Should we do them? Should we not do them? But it's a great time to, as my first pastor would say, take inventory of our lives. What can we do to come closer to Christ? I mentioned last week when we were talking about the axe head, the one son of the prophet lost his axe head while he was chopping, and it flew into the Jordan River. And that river was a picture of the word, and that stick that Elisha threw in was a picture of Christ. Look for Christ in the word. I don't care what book you're reading, look for Christ in that particular verse. And then ask the question, what's that verse saying to me? Right now, we're studying these two kingdoms, the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom, and we're learning about all kinds of political intrigue. And there's political intrigue going on even in our day. Unless you've turned your radio off, you've learned that there's been President Maduro was taken captive in Venezuela. And it seems like people will fall on either side, whether they love Trump or hate Trump. He did a good job. He did a terrible job. I'm going to ask you to look past all of that commentary and look at the Venezuelans themselves. I have a good friend who's a refugee from Venezuela. And he can't believe that it happened. He is so happy. I've been to Venezuela before all this stuff happened. Beautiful country, beautiful airport. And the whole thing went downhill. I'm going to talk to the boys in the back, the young men in the back row. The education system is turning the minds and hearts of our young people away from this country. The notion of socialism has never, ever worked. A new leader, a new idea, a new something. Even study the modern socialisms, Sweden, Denmark. They've all fallen apart. They're all retreating from it. Okay? And so let's get into this word. I'm going to try to stay out of politics. Let's get into this word and ask the question, what does God have in store for me today? So, in Syria, Hazael murders Ben-Hadad. So some background is, who are these guys? Okay. Both were kings of Syria. Some translations say Aram to make even more confusing for us. Hazael was a captain or a commander in the army of Ben-Hadad II. He murders him by suffocating him. And then he himself has an unexplained death, and he's succeeded by Ben-Hadad III. So what does that mean, his son? Ben-Hadad is a title like Pharaoh in Egypt, Pharaoh. So even though Ben-Hadad III is the son of Hazael, he took on the name Ben-Hadad, which means son of. Ben always means son of. Son of Hadad is the name of a Syrian god. So he took on that title. So there you see Ben-Hadad 1, 2, Hazael, and 3. Ben-Hadad I set up Syria as a power. So keep in mind, here's Israel, here's Judah, and you've got Moab and Ammon and Syria. Assyria and Babylon haven't really bubbled up yet. So Ben-Hadad is being raised, the first one, as a power. Ben-Hadad II takes that power and makes it grow. And then Hazael deals with Ben-Hadad II. I'm going to go back to 1 Kings. That's why I highlighted 1 Kings. And this is Elijah, not Elisha. He says, this is after Elijah pouted and he asked God to kill him. And God said, look, I want you to anoint Hazael, Jehu, and Elisha. And then down to verse 17, and this is what we're going to be covering. I have the check mark next to Elisha because Elisha is already in place. And the one who escapes the sword of Hazael shall Jehu put to death. And the one who escapes the sword of Jehu shall Elisha put to death. So there's the prophecy. Now we're into 2 Kings. Now Elisha came to Damascus, and Ben-Hadad, the king of Syria, was sick. And when it was told him, the man of God has come here, so you have to pause and say, okay, what about Ben-Hadad? He was the king when Naaman was the leper. Remember, Naaman went to the king and said, please write a letter. That was the guy who signed the letter. It's the same Ben-Hadad who sent the troops over to Dothan, and Elisha led them blind to Samaria, and then they all went back to Damascus. It's the same Ben-Hadad who put a siege around Samaria. His troops heard the sounds of other armies and they retreated. We've covered all those kinds of things. So you think by now Elisha has some respect for Ben-Hadad has some respect for this guy Elisha. So what does Ben-Hadad do? He says to his captain Hazael, take some gifts with you and go find that guy and ask him, am I going to get better from this sickness? So Hazael goes to Elisha and he takes the presents, loaded on 40 camels. And he came and he stood before me. He said, your son Ben-Hadad has sent me asking, am I going to get any better? And Elisha said, go say to him, you shall certainly recover. But the Lord has shown me that he shall certainly die. How's he going to die? Hazael's going to go back and deliver the message, you're going to get better. So here's Ben-Hadad in bed thinking he's going to get better. And what happens the next day? Hazael takes this nice warm comforter or quilt, gets it all super wet, presses against his face, and he suffocates him. But before all that happens, Elisha fixes his gaze on Hazael, and he just goes quiet. Now, I spent most of my career in sales. And in sales, when you ask the closing question, you go quiet. And sometimes it seems like an eternity. And the one who talks first loses. Anybody going into sales? I'm going to talk about sales in a little bit here. But he stares at Hazael till Hazael starts, he's getting embarrassed. Why is he staring at me? What else is he going to tell me? And then the tears start coming out of Elisha's face. Nothing's been said yet. Hazael says, why are you crying? Elisha says, because I know what you're going to do. You're going to become the king. You're going to come into my country. You're going to kill my young men. You're going to rip up our pregnant women. You're going to dash the heads of our kids against the rocks. And Hazael says, what kind of an animal do you think I am? And Elisha says, the Lord has shown me that you will be king over Syria. Now, how'd you like to be the messenger of the king and say, I want you to go over there to the prophet and ask him if I'm going to get better, and then come back and let me know? He comes back and says, hey, guess what? He says you're going to get better. So he departed from Elisha and he came to his master, and his master said, what did Elisha say to you? He said, he told me you're going to get better. But the next day, he took the bedcloth and dipped it in water and spread it over his face until he died. And Hazael became king in his place. Now, I've been using this to sort of keep track of where we are in all these successions of the north and the south. The south is on that side, the north is on that side. And you see all the different kings that have been taken care of so far. And there's Jehoram. He's going to die in chapter 8. You're going to see Ahaziah and Jehu. What Jehu's going to do, he's going to kill Joram. He's going to kill Ahaziah. He's going to kill Jezebel. We'll get to Jezebel in a little bit. So who's Jehoram? Keep in mind these names get all squishy back and forth. There's a revolt in Edom. That's down in the south between Israel and the Red Sea. There's a revolt. He goes against them. His army deserts him, and then he dies. Who's Ahaziah? Two guys with the same name. One is the son-in-law of Ahab, and he's a king in Israel. And another one named, he's a king over there in Judah. The king of Judah, he allies with the king of Israel, and they're going to go fight against Hazael. And then Jehu steps in. And this picture is trying to show how the two Ahaziahs are connected. Now, you've seen the words on this slide before. Jehoram and Joram. Two guys have the same name. The same guy has two names. And then depending on which translation you have and which book, Second Chronicles versus Second Kings, they're spelled differently. So bear with me. This is a family tree of the two tribes, the two royal portions of the tribes. And there you see Ahab is already dead. We covered that. Okay. Now you see where Jehoram marries Athaliah. Athaliah is the daughter of Ahab and Jezebel. And so you pull in a verse from the New Testament, do not be unequally yoked with unbelievers. Now that certainly relates to a marriage partner. But it also relates, the Bible tells us that we're in the world, but we're not supposed to be of the world. Our alliances and our partnerships and everything has to be measured in the face of God's word. What kind of entanglement can we get involved with? And what we're going to see that this marriage not only impacts the families, but it impacts the nations. Jehu is commissioned, and he's told, go and kill all of Ahab's, family. So he's going to kill Joram. He's going to kill Ahaziah. He's going to kill Jezebel. We read where Ahab had 70 sons. Now that's a pretty good trick if they're all sons. But the Hebrew language has no word for grandfather or grandson, so you could say that's 70 of his sons and his grandsons. That's 70 of the 112. He's also going to kill another 42. And what we're going to see is Ahaziah of the Judah side is compromised because of his mother, who's the daughter of Jezebel. A portion of his family go up and visit Samaria. They've got no business going up and visiting Samaria. It's a pagan nation at this point. And Jehu says, okay, everybody that went north, they're all going to die. So 112. Now, while that's going on, Athaliah realizes that her son Ahaziah has been murdered. She decides she's going to return the favor and wipe out the royal line of Judah, the royal line of David. Now, we go way back and we notice that there's a covenant between God and David that there's going to be a king of his bloodline who's going to rule forever. And what we're going to find is that everyone in the Solomon line, we're going to get to Nathan versus Solomon shortly, everyone in the Solomon line is killed off except this one kid. Now, over on, you see Joash, and he's got a beard. He reigned for a while. He was 1 year old when his aunt Jehosheba and his uncle Jehoiada take him and harbor him in the temple, and he lives there for 6 years, hidden in the temple. And that takes us to chapter 9. Then Elisha the prophet called one of the sons of the prophets and said to him, tie up your garments, take this flask of oil in your hand, and go to Ramoth Gilead. Now, Ramoth Gilead is a border town. It's a town of skirmish. It would be like saying, go to the yellow line in Gaza today. And that's where you're going to find one of the commanders there. And when you arrive, you're going to find this guy named Jehud. And I want you to go in and lead him away from the others. And then I want you to anoint him. And then once you do, get out of town. Jehu's an interesting character, and that's going to be very shortly. We're going to ask the question, who is Jehu? So who is Jehu? He starts off as a commander. He's going to become king of Israel through assassinations. But once again, archaeology comes and says, this guy is a real guy. They found this obelisk in what is today Iraq, and it mentions Jehu, and it mentions him paying tribute to the Syrians. And so, yes, the Assyrians rather. Yes, he is ruling over the decline of Israel. So he's a historic person. Now, this whole thing was kicked off, again, we'll go back to 1 Kings, when Elijah is talking to Ahab in the garden, in the vineyard, and he says, you're going to die. And because you're going to die, you're going to go, your whole bloodline is going to go just like these other dynasties went. And in 1 Kings, it doesn't mention it, but we're going to see in 2 Kings that Jehu, as a commander in Ahab's army, was listening to all this. So he heard it, and now it's going to come to fruition. So who was Jehu? His name means Jehovah lives. He was anointed by one of the prophets. What did he do? He killed Joram, he killed Ahaziah, he killed Jezebel, he purged Ahab's family, and he crushed Baal worship. That's an interesting story in and of itself. Good news and bad news. The good news is that he obeyed God. It sounded bloody, but that's what he was told to do. He wiped out Baal worship, but he resorted back to the golden calves. And you see there, Noah Webster, 1828. In 1828, Noah Webster wrote the first American dictionary. And so if you're looking at a modern translation, you'll see worshiping spelled with one P. If you're reading King James, you're going to see worship written with two P's. If you're reading something that's written in England, the word color will be spelled with an O-U-R, and the word color in America is spelled O-R. And so, thank you, Noah Webster. His idea was to separate us from England. Keep in mind, it's just right after the War of 1812. And he wanted to make things more efficient. So, if you're a fan of phonetic spelling, you would say that's worshiping, but it's worshiping. Same is true with words like cancel. It has two L's or one L. They're both acceptable. So he resorted to worshiping golden calves. So Jehu, in a nutshell, he was zealous. He was guilty of road rage. He was also guilty of, as you see up above, good news, bad news, partial obedience. So what's the takeaway? The takeaway is that God does not judge us based on our accomplishments. He judges us based upon our faithfulness. Now, if I wanted to say, who is a champion of the faith, names like Billy Graham come to mind, right? And he has been a counselor of presidents. He has traveled all over the world. He's done marvelous, marvelous things. And then we have some teachers down the hall. They're probably not going to visit the president. They're probably not going to travel around the world. But are they faithful to the position that they've been called to? That's how we're to be measured. That's the takeaway of Jehu. He did marvelous things for the Lord, but he wasn't faithful. So back to 2 Kings. So the young man, the servant of the prophet, went to the border town, and he came And all the commanders are sitting there. I don't know if they're drinking coffee or what they're doing, but he says, I've got a message for you. And Jehu says, for all of us? He says, no, just for you. So they arose and went into the house, and the young man anointed him with oil and said to him, thus saith the Lord, I anoint you king over the people of the Lord, over Israel, and you shall strike down the house of Abraham, so that I may avenge on Jezebel the blood of my servants the prophets, and the blood of all the servants of the Lord, and the whole house of Ahab shall perish. And I will cut off from Ahab every male, bond or free, in Israel. And the dogs shall eat Jezebel in the territory of Jezreel, and none shall bury her. Then he got out of town. And when Jehu came out, remember they went into the house, he comes back out and the servant says, so, is everything okay? Why did this mad fellow come to you? You know the fellow and his talk. Not true. Tell us really what happened. And Jehu says, thus and so he spake to me, saying, thus saith the Lord, I anoint you king over Israel. And then the guys take off their coats and lay them down. Jehu is king. Thus Jehu, the son of Jehoshaphat, the son of Nimshi, conspired against Joram. Joram was the king in Israel. Jehu was the commander. Joram had come to the battle site. Joram had gotten wounded. Joram retreats to Jezreel, son of God. And Jehu's going to start his campaign to deal with the prophecy that Elijah made to Ahab. Now here's the background. Joram gets together and he was wounded. So Jehu said, this is to the commanders that were with him in the border town, if this is your decision, then let no one slip out of the city to go and tell the news in Jezreel. It's going to be the element of surprise. And then Jehu mounted his chariot and went to Jezreel, for Joram lay there. And Ahaziah, the king of Judah, had come down to visit Joram. Keep in mind, he's married. He's the son of a marriage into that side. Now the watchman was standing on the tower in Jezreel. Now OSHA would not like that particular thing because there's no protective rail. If that guy gets tired, he's in deep trouble. Now the watchman was standing on the tower and he saw the company of Jehu as he came and said, I see a company. And Joram said, take a horseman and send out there and find out, is it peace? So a man on horseback went to meet him and said, thus says the king, is it peace? What we're going to find is 8 times in this chapter the word peace is mentioned. When we read in Isaiah, there is no peace for the wicked. Joram's going to send out one. Is it peace? Jehu's going to respond, say, what do you have to do with peace? Join my crew. Joram's going to send out a second guy. Is it peace? Jehu's going to say, are you even kidding me? Get behind me. And the watchman says, you sent 2 guys out. Nobody's coming back. And so Joram smells a rat. And the watchman reported, said, the messenger reached him, but he's not coming back. He said, send out a second one. And he's not coming back either. And Jehu is riding furiously. Joram said, get my chariot ready. Keep in mind, he's already wounded. He made his chariot ready. And both Joram, king of Israel, and Ahaziah, king of Judah, go out to meet him. And Joram saw Jehu and he said, same thing, is it peace? Jehu gives the same answer. What peace can there be so long as the whorings and sorceries of your mother Jezebel are so many? Jezebel was his biological mother. Now, I don't care how bad your mom was. If somebody calls your mom a whore, there's a problem there. We would say them's fighting words. But it wasn't just physical whoredom, it was spiritual whoredom. What peace can there be so long as the whoring and the sorcerings of your mother Jezebel are so many? Then Joram reined about and fled, saying to Ahaziah, treachery. And Jehu drew his bow with his full strength and shot Joram between the shoulders, so that the arrow pierced his heart, and he sank in his chariot. Now, how many here are archery hunters? A couple hands go up, okay? My guess is, in today's day and age, you're using a crossbow and not a longbow, am I right? Okay, maybe not, maybe so. And my guess is you're probably in a tree stand, and there is a deer that's sort of tiptoeing along. And when the deer goes broadside, and let's say 40 yards, and you hit the deer, you're saying, that's quite a shot. I'd be proud of myself if I did something like that. Imagine riding on a chariot furiously, using a longbow with no scope, shooting at a moving target, and you put that arrow between the shoulder blades and through the heart. Now, who aimed that arrow? God did that. Who aimed that rock when David killed Goliath? God did it. Who stopped the sun in the valley of Ajalon when Joshua had his victory? God did it. And so a young man who's starting his career in sales, he comes to me and he asks the question, he says, so what is the trade-off between self-confidence and trusting in God? He's been in sales just a short period of time, and he's doing really, really well. So the first thing I did was I told him about the wide world of sports. I said, a day in sales is like the wide world of sports, the thrill of victory and the agony of defeat. You'll go from hero to zero. You'll have a month of fantastic sales, and a month will be dry. And then I said this, every good and perfect gift cometh from above, from the Father of lights, in whom there is no variableness, no shadow of turning. You made a sale, it's a gift of God. You used the right words. You were quiet after the closing question. It was a gift of God. And then I went here. Come now, you who say, today or tomorrow we'll go into such and such a town. You get your territory, you get your annual goals, and spend a year and trade, make a profit, make a sale. Yet you don't know what tomorrow will hold. The book of Proverbs says, boast not of tomorrow, because you don't know what a day will hold. What is your life? It's a mist that appears for a little time and then vanishes. Dr. Dobson would talk about a man on his deathbed, and he said, nobody on his deathbed sits there and says, I wish I made that big sale. The man on his deathbed says, I wish I spent more time with my kids. I wish I had more words of wisdom to share with them. Instead, you ought to say, if the Lord lived, if the Lord wills, first of all, if the Lord wills, make a sale. No, if the Lord wills, we'll live. He's the giver and taker of life. So a trade-off between self-confidence and trust in God. Sure, it's important to carry yourself properly and present yourself properly, but it's God who makes that sale. It's God who shot that arrow. And whoever knows the right thing to do and fails to do it, to him, it is sin. There's a sin of commission, and there's a sin of omission. Back to 2 Kings. So Jehu says to his right-hand man, he says, take him and throw him on the plot of ground, that good old vineyard again. For remember when you and I rode side by side behind Ahab, his father, how the Lord made this pronouncement against him? He's recalling back to what Elijah had to say. Both Jehu was there and Bidkar was there. And when Ahaziah, the king of Judah, saw this, he fled to some garden. And Jehu pursued him and said, shoot him also. And they shot him in the chariot like a young dog, that he was devoured. And what happened to him? And he fled to Megiddo. And he died there. And the servants carried and took him back to Jerusalem. He was the king of Judah. So Jehu is now riding towards Jezreel. That's where Jezebel is hanging out. And I put there, yoo-hoo, Jehu. And we're going to see that maybe she had different kinds of motivations when we read. And when Jehu came to Jezreel, Jezebel heard of it, and she painted her eyes and adorned her head and looked out the window. I have their dress for success. Well, she's not going to be very successful by the end of the day. And as Jehu enters the gate, she said, "Is it peace?" Same question, right? "Is it peace, you Zimri, murderer of your master?" Now, First Kings we studied where Zimri had murdered the king at the time, Elah, and Zimri in turn was murdered 7 days later, king for a week. So what's her motivation? So first of all, she's prettying herself up. Does she know she's going to die and she wants to die as a queen? Is she thinking about maybe seducing Jehu? Or is she intimidating Jehu? She already accused him up there in verse 31. You're a murderer. What's her motivation? We don't know. And Jehu lifted up his face to the window and he said, "Who's on my side?" And 2 or 3 eunuchs looked out at him and he said, "Throw her down." And they did. And I don't know how high it was, but when that body hit, it was a big mess. The blood splattered on the wall and on the horses, and they trampled on her. It was a pretty graphic end of her story. Of course, Jehu, he just gets off the chariot. He just killed Joram. He had Ahaziah killed. My guess is that it was his horses where the blood is splattered. He says, let's have lunch. He said, now, see to it that that cursed woman gets buried. She's the queen's daughter. She should be given a dignified end. So they go out there, and what do they find? She's gone. The dogs had eaten her up. When they came back and they told him, they said, "This is the word of the Lord, which he spoke by the servant Elijah the Tishbite. In the territory of Jezreel, the dogs shall eat the flesh of Jezebel. And the corpse of Jezebel shall be as dung on the face of the field." Well, literally, that's what happened. If she was eaten, what goes in must come out. The dogs ate the Jezebel. And so the territory of Jezreel is dunged with Jezebel. We'd like to think that that was the end of Jezebel. But what we're going to find is that Jezebel has a daughter, Athaliah, and that wickedness is just going to continue to permeate. Which brings us to chapter 10. We're not going to get to Athaliah this week, but let's talk about what happens to Ahab's 70 sons. I'll say sons and grandsons. He had 70 of them. So Jehu wrote letters and sent them to Samaria, to the rulers of the city. He said, "And as soon as the letter comes to you, seeing your master's sons are with you, and there are with you chariots and horses fortified, select the best and the fittest of your master's son." If you think your guys are going to be in control, pick the best. But they were afraid of Jehu. I don't know how much news got to Samaria by then, but they were afraid. And they said, "If we had 2 kings, how could we hold up against you?" They said, "We're your servants. What would you like us to do? We will not make anyone king. Do whatever you think is the right thing to do." Then he wrote a second letter. He said, "If you're on my side, and if you're ready to obey me," again, pretty graphic. Life was cheap then. "Take the heads of your master's sons and come to me at Son of God tomorrow." And now the king's sons, 70 persons, were with the great men of the city who were rearing them. And when the messengers came and told them, "We have brought the heads of the king's sons." And on the right, you see a 17th century engraving of 2 stacks of skulls sitting there. He said, lay them in 2 heaps at the entrance of the gate until the morning. And then in the morning, when he went out, he stood and said to all the people, you are innocent. It was I who conspired all this stuff. Know then that there shall fall to the earth nothing of the word of the Lord. It was true then, and it's true today. There's nothing that shall fall short of the word of the Lord. We're living in an age of prophecy. We're living in a time where time is short. Jesus said he's coming again, and I'm convinced that his coming is imminent. And nothing that's been prophesied, whether it's what Jehu said right here, what Isaiah or Zechariah or Zephaniah or any of those others had said, it's all going to come true. So Jehu struck down all who remained in the house of Ahab, and all his great men and his close friends and his priests, and left them nothing remaining. He kills 42 members of the tribe of Judah who sent their families up to visit Samaria, and he slaughters the rest of Ahab's family. I have 2 minutes, and we're going to leave this story until next week. But I'm going to give you the modern day counter story to this. What Jehu does is he goes up to Samaria and he says, I want you to invite all the faithful of Baal. I want you to invite all the faithful of Baal to come in and make sure that there are no dissidents. Make sure anybody that's not really a Baal follower is not part of this thing. So he comes up with a clean slate, so to speak, and then he murders all those prophets of Baal. The modern day side of that, this goes back when the USSR was still around. The story is told, that clock's 1 minute behind. The story is told that the secret police would break into these prayer meetings with their machine guns, and they made sure that all the unbelievers were out, giving the impression that they're going to kill off everybody that's still in. And when they made sure it was just believers, they put down their machine guns and they worshiped together. The USSR is gone, but there's still plenty of persecution in this world. And I'm out of time.